are now at Scream 2022. I've been holding off on watching Scream 6 until I got this review series done, so after I finish this, I'll be able to check that one out, which I'm really excited for. As you can tell, I'm in my regular location, and earlier this year I had to switch locations to the other place that I was using with the other Scream reviews, and then I just got kind of lazy and I never switched back, but now I did, and hopefully I can stay here for a while. But going back to the movie, it's refreshing because this is the first time I actually don't have to say anything about Sidney Prescott when I'm talking about the synopsis of the film. And that's because we get this new character, Sam Carpenter, a woman with quite a great secret, a secret that causes her to be estranged from her sister Tara. But when Tara is attacked by someone donning the ghost face mask, Sam and her friends get the aid of Sidney, Dewey, and Gale to stop the new threat. When this film came out last year, of course, there was a lot of excitement for it, but I feel like there was a sense that this movie was actually better than a lot of people were expecting, including myself. And one of the biggest questions about this film was, how are they going to pull off a Scream film without Wes Craven? Something about this series continuing without that iconic presence in the director chair, something about it just seemed off. But these new directors really pull it off, and they make a film that not only has a lot of love for the Scream franchise, but it also has a lot of respect for Wes Craven. One of the most obvious examples is the credits themselves, where the movie ends with the words "for Wes" before the credits start, and the credits themselves have the same style as the first 3 Scream films. There's the use of the Dutch angle in this film, which is something that Wes Craven incorporated in the other 4 films. And just overall, this film, it manages to feel like Scream. But at the same time, these new directors are still able to add themselves. They're still able to bring their own creative flair to the table. This comes into play with Ghostface. They keep that sense of menacing about this character, where this figure that in a lot of scenes just seems to tower over characters. But these new directors also incorporate their own scenes with Ghostface that are actually now, I would say, kind of iconic. They add quite a few memorable scenes with this character. Like the first time Ghostface kills someone in the movie and he's standing in front of him in front of headlights. Or the scene in the hospital where the camera focuses in on Ghostface's hand and kind of tracking with the knife as Ghostface is going after Tara. And for as much as Wes Craven, his directing, he made this character a massive icon, these new filmmakers take the character and they still manage to make Ghostface stand out in their own way, with their own types of shots. And also something that these people do differently from Wes Craven is how they tackle jump scare satire. The way that Wes Craven did it, it was through an overuse of it. And through that overuse, it became very funny. And like quite a few elements in this film, these people take that satire and they go their own direction with it. Like in this film, you have a scene where it's a character in a house, and it's this extensive scene of possible jump scares. And every single time you think one is coming, the music just cranks up. It's very intense, and then nothing happens. And I just thought it was an interesting spin on mocking jump scares, which that leads me into the meta, and this film continues that pattern from Scream 4 of commenting on things as you're actually watching them. And one of the biggest ones for me with this film is that, and I remember this from the first time that I was watching it, that when I went in, I just thought it was so weird, and a lot of people thought this as well, but I just thought it was so weird that they called this film Scream. Not Scream 5 or Scream, whatever, after a colon, and it just seemed like the same thing that happened with Halloween 2018, and originally that had a title of like Halloween Returns, and I thought that really worked. But they just called it Halloween, and now whenever you talk about, John Carpenter's Halloween or Halloween from Rob Zombie or, Halloween 2018, they're all called Halloween. You have to specify every time. Tangent on Halloween over, but I just thought it was weird that they called it exactly the same thing as they did the original. But there's actually a joke about that in the movie, which I did not see coming.
Can we talk about the title, Stab? What, just like the original? Just call it Stab 8. It's fucking Stab 8. You're not fooling anyone.
After I saw that, I was like, okay, I'm fine with the title. You want to call it Scream? That's fine. And also following in the vein of Scream 4, where Scream 4 coming off a decade plus after Scream 3, it still got up to date with like the found footage and everything that film was talking about. This film feels up to date with how horror is right now, where you get that opening and Jenna Ortega answers the call and she's saying how her favorite horror film is The Babadook. And, you know, this film introduces elevated horror and we expect more out of horror films. We expect more depth. There are a lot of points where this film also feels like a response to the Star Wars sequel trilogy and how toxic that fan base is.
Remember the Stab movie that came out last year?
Oh, yeah, the one the Knives Out guy directed, right? You know, I actually really liked that one.
Of course you did. You have terrible taste. I hate you. All they're talking about is how Stab 8 pissed on their childhoods.
And just all that combined, it makes me realize that no matter how many Scream films we actually get, like it could go up to 15. And just the way that films are reception to it, the horror genre, how all that just keeps changing. There's always going to be something relevant in these films. These films are always going to have something relevant to add to the conversation. But the element that really impressed me about this movie, the reason I'm excited as I am to see where they take certain storylines in Scream 6, is this new character in Sam. And the reason is because very early on in the movie, you learn that she's the daughter of Billy Loomis. There's just so much potential in that. And it's not only unique, because we haven't had a main character in this franchise that is related to one of the killers of one of the previous stories, but also that there's just more you can do with that. The fact that maybe moving on, there can be a ghost face at some point that is related to one of the victims of Billy Loomis and is now putting on the mask to go after Sam. There's a certain complexity to that I wish it's something that they would sometime explore. Like this film, it leaves the door open for that. But besides having that interesting reveal, this character also kind of becomes the heart of the film because of this backstory between her and her sister, where she feels like she's to blame because of her parents separating, and the whole film is just them getting closer. And also when it goes to the performances from Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega, that you buy into their sister dynamic. And it's this dynamic that you really get attached to. And it's something new in this franchise that now the main protagonist is actually, like, you get to follow two characters. And all of that associated with this character's storyline. It just shows that this film is not trying to just make another Sidney Prescott. It's giving us another character to root for. But it just goes in some really unique directions with this character. One of my issues with Scream 4 was that it didn't quite figure out how to separate from the legacy characters. And this film really does a better job with that, where it's like 30 minutes into the film before you even see Dewey. Because the whole time you've been getting to know this new cast of characters, and they work really well. Especially when you get to Randy's niece. Randy is a character that still to this point is sorely missed, in my opinion. And I was just so glad that we got another character to fill that place. And I was glad that she really takes after her uncle.
New main characters, yes, but supported by and related to legacy characters. It always goes back to the original.
But touching on the legacy characters, this film doesn't just use them to get our attention. It actually does some important stuff with them, especially between Dewey and Gale, and where the conflict feels kind of reminiscent of how Scream 2 and Scream 3 started out, where they're once again at odds. This time you actually feel like years have gone by between these characters, where they have gone through a divorce, and there's questions of if they can ever get back together. And there's an aspect at the beginning where it kind of shows that Dewey is actually becoming kind of distant, where this divorce he had with Gale really took a toll on him. Whenever he sees Gale on TV, you just see in his eyes that like him remembering the good times and just hoping he could have that again. But then as the film goes on, it just goes into this heartbreaking tragedy where after Dewey dies, you know for a fact they're never going to be able to figure out if they could have just started over, if they could have continued their lives together. Just all that. In the midst of introducing new characters, introducing new storylines, there's still substance to these characters. They're not just there because these actors want to cash a check. And honestly, that's just how you write the best fan service. And even though Wes Craven is referred to as the master of suspense, these directors also know how to create suspense of their own, and just having scenes that have this lingering tension through them, like especially in the hospital scene where it's this dark hallway and Tara is in her wheelchair trying to escape a ghost face that's just walking up slowly behind her. There's the opening that serves as an updated version of the original Scream, where here, of course, it's seeing Tara in her house just as Drew Barrymore was in her house in the first film. But then throughout her conversation with Ghostface, she's texting her friend on her phone, and then Ghostface is revealed to be on the other side of the texts as well. And then, of course, where Tara has to keep locking the door on her phone and it keeps unlocking on her. And it was just a cool way of incorporating new technology into that type of scene. But what adds to the tension is that this is once again a pretty brutal Scream film. And this works especially well for the ending where Sam kills her boyfriend, who's revealed to be one of the killers. Where the whole movie, it's this arc of Sam having to learn to accept who she is. But then you actually see what she can be, and it's interesting and very bloody, and the perfect end for the arc of that character. And I would actually say that the ending of this film has a better tone than the ending of the original. Because the original, how that film ended, it kind of struggled with tones between going more serious and then trying to be more humorous. And then the ending wasn't as satisfying as it could have been. But this ending with, of course, that scene I just described with Sam and that last conversation she has with Sydney that's kind of like passing the torch, I would say, between these characters. And also where she realizes that she could be heading down the same path that her dad did. And it just made for one of the most satisfying endings of the franchise. An ending that, as soon as it got to that point, I wanted Scream 6. It just left off in a place where I just wanted to see what else was going to happen from this. However, I do have a few small gripes with the film, almost nitpicks. Bigger one being Dewey's death. I think that overall, the film still kept the emotion of that. The fact that after it happens, there's sort of like a remembrance of that he's actually kind of heroic in what he did, and you know, that he always helped people. And Sam is talking to Gail about how if Dewey didn't step in, she and her sister wouldn't have been alive. But the way he actually dies in the movie, I think, could have been written better. Because he goes back to Ghostface.
The head. What? You have to shoot him in the head, or they always come back.
But then he gets distracted by a phone call, and then that gives Ghostface the jump on him. And I just thought, okay, you couldn't wait to answer your phone after shooting this person in the head. It was just a brief annoyance. It was just a thing where I was like, guys, what are you doing here? Like, you're going to kill off this legacy character like that. Like I said, minor annoyance. And the final thing on here, that there's a section towards the end of the second act and the beginning of the third act where it's this party going on at this house, which actually happens to be Stu's house from the original Scream. And that whole chunk, at times it felt a bit long. Because Sam wasn't there, it was just these other characters interacting, and it was kind of like paying homage to that scene in the first Scream, but it wasn't quite the same level of energy as the first Scream, or quite as iconic as the first Scream. But anyway, those were just some minor things in this film. I thought this was a fantastic continuation of the franchise that proved that this franchise could continue without Wes Craven, that someone else that knows what they're doing with this franchise, that has an appreciation for these characters, can step up and bring something to the table that feels like Scream. It feels like the stuff we love from this franchise, while also being willing to go in some new directions. I'm going to give Scream 2022 an A. I'm crossing my fingers so hard that Scream 6 can continue that potential that this film set up so well. Pretty soon here, I'm going to go out and see Scream 6 for myself, and then you'll have that review. And I'm also gonna start another review series that I think you guys can figure out at this point what it's gonna be, but I'll just let you guys wait for it when it appears. And also, I have some catching up I have to do with some other films that I saw this year that I haven't gotten the chance to review. And I'm going to do something special with those, so be on the lookout for those as well. Guys, as always, have a great day.